Sawi Omnibus. So I want to try something a little different with my videos. Well, normally I read out the script and then accompany it with images. I think it would be easier for me and more visually engaging for the viewers if I had a game playing in the background instead. This would both make editing the video together easier, and since I figured that most people will play the video in the background anyways while doing something else, and that 99% of the information I want to convey comes from the audio, this move might be for the better. So let me know if you like this new style in the comments. Also, in the future I might want to do game reviews, so I really have to have the footage recorded anyways. And also, for this game especially, the one playing in the background right now, Nier Automata, I definitely want to review it. So anyways, onwards to the actual video. I've noticed recently that I've gotten a lot of new subscribers, views, and comments from a video I made a while back called Anarcho-Capitalism Debunked in 3 Minutes. So I wanted to take the time to give my perspective on something a lot of people who would call themselves either liberal or libertarian like to focus on, whether they value liberty or equality. And often they use this to contrast with the progressives, that liberals value liberty while progressives value equality. And I would say that we can define liberty as favoring equality of opportunity, while equality as favoring equality of outcome. So the difference being, do we want to remove all the barriers to success, or do we want to elevate people to success? And it's this dichotomy that seems to define the current culture war. It's individualism versus collectivism, meritocracy versus identity politics, Enlightenment values versus Marxism. Except, no, that's not actually how our cultural discourse works. In one way, there's many different values people hold up as the most important, and liberty and equality are just two of them. But if we look at this at a more fundamental level, the dichotomy people think of when it comes to value is not liberty versus equality, it's morality versus immorality. So I know I've said a lot there, so let me break this down into the major points I wanted to address in this video. First, I want to show that liberty and equality are just two of many ideologies and values people hold, and that the idea that all groups either fall into one or the other category is false. Secondly, I think that at the heart of all these ideologies is a fundamentally moral dichotomy. And lastly, why I believe that placing morality as the highest value is a much more honest and better approach to viewing the world, and gives a lot more clarity when looking at the issues. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that I think a lot of us have been led into thinking that the dichotomy between liberty and equality is sort of the be-all, end-all, that Western secular Enlightenment values are the bastion of individualism and freedom, while everything else, from Marxism to Islam, is collectivistic and authoritarian. This, I think, is painting with way too broad a brush. Only thinking in terms of collective versus individual reduces all ideas so that they either fall into one category or the other, and if they happen to fall in the category you don't like, you can just dismiss it without actually looking at the idea. Any idea that you either hear called or believed to be collectivist, you'll just automatically dismiss. Reality, I think, is a lot more complicated. Ideas don't just fall into individual and collective, and people don't just hold one of these two up as the highest value. Let's take two other ideologies, for instance, white identitarianism and Islam. Now, you can say that both of these ideologies are collectivistic, but the two are vastly different from each other, and to simplify it down to whether they believe in the group collective or the individual is not taking the idea seriously. The world is just not the collective or the individual. Now, I know I just made it seem like I think the world is not black and white, and what I'm about to say might sound like it contradicts that, but hear me out. Inherent in all these ideologies is something that does turn them all into a binary dichotomy. The belief that this idea is morally good, and that others are morally bad. Now, I bet a lot of you probably just closed the video when I said morally good and bad because, let's face it, a lot of the people in the idea sphere on YouTube, and of course, what our society has been taught for the past century, is that good and evil don't actually exist, that morality is just our subjective opinion. Now, I'll let you decide for yourselves whether you think that declaring good and evil don't exist was a good idea, but the point I want to make is that in Western quote-unquote societies, we have ideological pluralism where there isn't just one ideology that has a total hegemony over our culture. But of course, the progressives are dangerously close to attaining this. But the fact is, we live in societies where different ideologies compete for dominance. There is no absolute idea of right and wrong anymore, but despite what we say, we act as though right and wrong do exist. For the liberal, individual liberty is something which is inherently good, and that the morally good thing to do is to have a society that works as much for individual freedom as possible. And for progressives, they have it with equity. And even with Islam and the alt-right, they both believe that their ideas are objectively good for the world and that the others are objectively bad, so they want them implemented over those other ideas. So we can see the dichotomy re-emerge, that we think of our discourse as being good versus bad, not liberty versus equality. So I think this brings us to my perspective on all this. What do I believe in? What do I value highest? Well, I believe that since all ideologies think of their ideas as morally good, why not just uphold morality itself as the highest good? And I think this is effectively how a traditional view of ideas in society works, and has worked for thousands of years. There weren't multiple ideologies competing with one another, with their own ideas of what good and evil are. There was just this idea of there is good and evil, they're real concepts and they're objective. Now, what is good? What is the good? That's a question that philosophers and theologians and the believers have debated and tried to understand since the beginning of time. But they all would have agreed on the fact that good and evil were objective and real things that existed, and not just our opinion. And again, decide for yourself whether you think a society is better off with subjective morality, but as for me, I want to put my trust in the ancients. So where does that leave us? To bring us back to the dichotomy of liberty and equality, I suggest we take a new approach and determine first not what ideas are liberal or progressive, or even think about the ideas first. I think we should ground ourselves in what is good. Which, of course, if morality is subjective, this is impossible, but if it isn't, we can start with an objective moral standard to judge ideas based on their goodness, and I think this is a much more honest and useful dichotomy than liberty versus equality. Diabana.
Wir wollen unseren alten Kaiser Wilhelm wieder. Wir wollen unseren alten Kaiser Wilhelm wieder. Aber den mit dem Bart, mit dem langen Bart. Aber den mit dem Bart, mit dem langen Bart. So schwärmten unsere Eltern von der guten alten Zeit. Sie liegt so fern und weit, die alte Kaiserzeit. Doch war sie wirklich besser, diese gute alte Zeit, als einst der Opa, die Oma hat wohl gefeit. Ja, mit Jagdgesang und mit Hörnerklang, rings um Fair Berlin, durch die Wälder ziehen. Ja, mit Jagdgesang und mit Hörnerklang, ritt die Oma mit dem Opa. Doch sie hielten an und küssten sich, sonst wären wir